So BlackRock and the other Bitcoin spot ETFs have already bought over 270,000 Bitcoin in the first 30 days of trading since these Bitcoin ETFs have launched. And that is over 300 days worth of newly issued Bitcoin that has been gobbled up in under 1 month. So the hodlers aren't selling. We have a historic demand shock from these Bitcoin ETFs, and the whales are quietly accumulating. So today, we're going to be analyzing all of this and explaining why absolutely no one is prepared for the Bitcoin halving that is happening in under 100 days. So we're going to do all of this by sharing my screen, and we're going to start having a look at some very interesting charts that help to explain the supply shock that we are seeing in Bitcoin today, okay? So this chart here is showing the amount of Bitcoin that's bought by the Bitcoin spot ETFs in green, okay? We've talked about this chart a number of times here on the channel, and it kind of does a good job at showing the supply shock that we are seeing. So we are watching the amount of Bitcoin bought by the Bitcoin ETFs really accelerate. And we do have another chart we're going to look at showing this acceleration in a moment. But first, we want to look at the overall picture and try to compare this to the amount of Bitcoin that's actually been mined. So that's what I think this chart here does, because here in the orange, we can see that in 28 days, this is the number of Bitcoin that are mined. We have around 25,000 Bitcoin that are mined every 28 days, okay? Again, the halving is going to change this shortly, and we are going to come back to talking about the halving in a moment, but I'm just trying to highlight how the amount of Bitcoin being sold by Grayscale has really slowed down a lot. And this is why every week or so that we do come back and check on this chart, the differential between the green and the red boxes is growing every week. And that is because the demand from these Bitcoin spot ETFs is accelerating. So that's what this chart here is highlighting. This is a chart from Alessandro, and we can see over the past week here in the latter stages of February, these big green bars is highlighting the amount of Bitcoin that's being bought by the Bitcoin spot ETFs. And we can see this amount is growing, okay? And now it has surpassed the amount of Bitcoin being bought in the first week of February and the last week of January. We can see here very little volume, very little demand in late January and early February. A lot of people were kind of throwing shade at these Bitcoin spot ETFs. During this time, a lot of people were kind of pointing at the demand from these spot ETFs and saying, hey, look, you know, another Bitcoin bubble has popped. All of the speculative demand has gone. Peter Schiff was very loud. You guys might remember a couple of weeks ago. All of these kind of narratives were flying around in the Bitcoin space because most people thought the demand from the ETFs had subsided. It had gone away, so to say. But the past couple of weeks have kind of highlighted that this is not the case at all. And we still have huge demand coming through these Bitcoin spot ETFs. So that's why I really like this chart. And it does show you below the line, so the midline, the big black line in the middle, those blue bars is actually highlighting the amount of selling by Grayscale. So we can see that essentially since the end of January, the amount of selling by Grayscale on a daily basis has been under $100 million per day. So again, very bullish. And just when you thought that was bullish, we have this chart here. So this is the hodl waves. And we can see 80% of Bitcoin hasn't moved in over 6 months. That's what this chart here is showing. And it's a really cool chart because it also shows you the different age of the different coins. So the purple bars, or the purple, what are we going to call that? Purple waves? We'll call that the purple waves at the top. This is showing the amount of Bitcoin that hasn't been moved in over 10 years. And as you can see, it's a pretty sizable amount of the Bitcoin supply. That looks as if I was going to eyeball it, that's well over 10% of the Bitcoin supply hasn't moved in over 10 years. Think about that for a moment. It's 2024. What was the price of Bitcoin in 2014? It was a lot lower than it is today at $50,000. The price of Bitcoin in 2014 would have been around $200 to $300 to $400. It was a lot lower than it is today. So, and there are people who have been holding Bitcoin since it was $300 and $400, and they haven't spent it. despite Bitcoin being above $50,000. So I think this really puts things into perspective of just how little Bitcoin there is actually available for sale. Okay, we have these Bitcoin ETFs buying 270,000 coins in the first month of trading, and there's just simply not that amount of Bitcoin available for sale. Okay, if 80% of the Bitcoin hasn't moved in 6 months, these ETFs are essentially fighting over the very limited amount of Bitcoin sitting on exchanges for sale today. Now, let's do some fun maths. So we know there's around 2 million Bitcoin on exchanges today. These ETFs have bought 270,000 coins. Okay. So if this rate of buying continues, hypothetically, we could get into a situation where there's no Bitcoin on exchanges very quickly. And it could happen a lot faster than most people actually believe it to be. Okay. Even if we were looking at this very conservative, and let's say we're only going to look at the amount of Bitcoin that's been net bought by these Bitcoin spot ETFs. So that's around 100,000 coins. So that's the differential between the red, which is grayscale, the selling, and the green. So this is the Bitcoin bought by the spot ETFs. If we're seeing net 100,000 Bitcoin bought every single 28 days or every single month, that means in around 20 months, we have no Bitcoin left on exchanges if this rate of buying continues from these spot ETFs. And right now, it doesn't look like slowing down, okay? It really doesn't. If in the 4th week of the Bitcoin spot ETFs, we're seeing bigger volume than what we saw in the 2nd and the 3rd week, I think this is a very interesting trend that we're going to keep an eye on here on the channel. It's something that's very interesting. It's nearly as interesting as this. This chart here is looking at the addresses that hold more than 1,000 Bitcoin. So this is essentially your whales. And you can see here, we saw a massive uptick in the amount of Bitcoin held by whales to begin 2024. A historic uptick. We haven't seen an increase like this for well over a year. Okay, so right now, it looks as if things are very bullish in the Bitcoin space. Things are extraordinarily bullish in the Bitcoin space. The whales are eating up the supply, as Rob Wallace has put it well in the chat, okay? And if you want to learn a little bit more about the whales eating up the supply, after this live stream's finished, I'm going to pop a link on screen to a recent video we did earlier in the week, diving deep into the maths behind the whales accumulating Bitcoin. I'm going to pop a link to that one right about there. And with all that said, thank you to everyone who joined. You can catch us in a live stream tomorrow. We're going to go live again around a similar time tomorrow. So we'll see you all then.